Hi, welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show. My name is Avrum Rosensweig. That works really well. And I am delighted to be back. I think it's my sixth show for this new iteration of the Avrum Rosensweig Show. Um, Today's guest is Dr. Shawna Novak, who is an old friend of mine. She's we're going to tell you a lot about her, and you're gonna get to know her over the next hour or so. But suffice it to say that she's into global health and social medicine. Her story is fascinating, and I think you're going to enjoy it. And she's somewhat ubiquitous in our world. She seems to be everywhere, and her focus really is on making this world a better place. So stay tuned. Before we get into our discussion with Sean, I just want to tell you a little bit about the podcast. Since I was a kid, I was fascinated by people and their stories. So no matter where I would go, much to the chagrin of people that I was with, I would have conversations with strangers and I would probe them deeply. And the reason I would do that was because I felt that everybody has a story to tell. And so often those stories are I get so curious about them because they're so adventuresome in nature, they're so colorful, and they really speak to the human soul. And I found that I learned a lot about myself by schmoozing with others. I myself, as a kid, was, I would say, not that attached to myself. I was really not at home with my essence. And I found that by asking people questions, regardless of whether they were strangers or not, that I could learn an awful lot about myself. And I did. And looking back on my life today, I'm 63 years old. I think that so much of me is from the tapestry of others. And I would argue that most of us are like that. You know how sometimes when you're speaking, you hear somebody else's voice in your head, or you hear a phrase that your father might say, or your mother, a friend of yours, or even somebody who you may have met in Spain on a biking trip. It's an in joke between Sean and I, which we'll get to. So that's what I like. And I'm sure those of you who partake in such conversations understand clearly what I'm saying. For those of you who don't, try it. Walk in the street, be brave, be courageous, and stop and say hello to somebody. And then ask them how they're doing and ask them a little bit about their life. While many people will sort of take a step back and almost prefer not to go there, you'll find very often that there are a lot of people out there, maybe it's because of loneliness, there's a lot of that out there as well, who will, after a little bit of waking up, tell you about themselves. So give it a try. Some of the podcasts that I've done to date have been with my niece, Devorah Mason. Devorah lives in Jerusalem. She's a mother of five, and she has a child right now in the army. The reason I spoke with Devorah is because during the war, I want to make my podcast very Israel based, not exclusively so. Hence, Shawna being on the show today, as she's lived in Israel for many years, because I want for us in the diaspora to understand how our brothers and sisters in Israel are feeling, how they're coping. And I want our Israeli brothers and sisters to understand that we are thinking about them and we are truly, truly concerned and part of their world, part of their life. Am Yisrael El Chai, like they say, the nation of Israel is alive and we are one. So that oneness, that achdut, as we call it in Hebrew, I would like to give over through the show. I've also spoken with Noach Braun last week, actually, and Noach is the CEO and co-founder of the Israel Guide Dog, Israel Center for the Guide Dogs for the Blind. Israel Center for Guide Dogs for the Blind. Fascinating human being, been running it for 40 years, a true blue Israeli, funny, stoic, strong, courageous. You know the type. Have a listen to that interview because you will learn about Noach as an Israeli and you will learn about the function of dogs in Israeli society. Not only now during the war, but for people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, from those who are visually impaired, from children who have special needs. It's fascinating how God made dogs. It's just absolutely fascinating. You know, the entomology, is it entomology or etymology? The root of words. The root of words, we'll just say that, is kolev, which is all heart. And for you who have had a dog, you'll know that dogs live to give. And you'll learn about the intersection between humankind and animals on that show. I've spoken to Bradley Strauss, who's world-renowned cardiologist, who made Aliyah a number of years ago, splits his time between Toronto and Israel. And he, after hearing about October 7th, decided, I don't understand why I'm here, and I'm going to go there. And he did. And he volunteered for free in an Israeli hospital. Last week, I also did a roundtable, which I think I'm going to be moving into a little bit. Roundtables are essentially shows where I have 3 or 4 guests, or perhaps more, all with a similar background in terms of their careers or issues that they've dealt with. This one was called How Children Think. And colorfully, I was quite proud of myself. I had a 9-year-old on. And if you've ever had a long conversation with a very bright, advanced, beyond their years 9-year-old, you'll understand how beautiful and magical that can be. Rachel Mammon, my friend, was on. She is a kindergarten teacher and a very unique kindergarten teacher. Ellen Schwartz was on. Ellen is someone who is actually quite high profile. She had a child with Canavan disease, and she raised that child, her and her husband and her family, to live until 21 years old. Canavan, usually those kids live until 4 years old. So have a listen at avrumrosensweig.com. You can go to YouTube. I have a channel there. And of course, I'm on Facebook as well and other social media outlets. I really want you to become part of this. I'm very open to any ideas you might have for guests. And I'm looking forward to really bringing the world together. Not only Jews, not only diaspora Jews and Israeli Jews, but every Jew, every human being. Because, you know, at the end of the day, we all live and breathe, and we all have our struggles, and we all have our pleasures, and we have so much in common. And by understanding that and by hearing it, I believe that is a road to peace. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very, very excited to introduce to you my friend, Dr. Shawna Novak. Shawna, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you. How are you doing this morning?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. Shawna's here in Toronto now, although she spends an awful lot of time in Israel and has done so for a number of years. You know, Shawna, before I tell our listeners, our viewers, a bit about you, I'm truly fascinated by you. I really am, because your resume is so dotted with success and internationalism. You have put so much time and effort into your career, and you're a doctor. And I think that there is something highly unique about doctors in our society. It's very hard to explain, but of the many doctors that I know, I've worked with many because I ran Via Hafta for years, a Jewish humanitarian organization, and we did international work, medical international work. Dr. Michael Silverman was our director of that. They're very brilliant and very eclectic. Now, obviously, like any other career, there are those who are like that and those who less so. But all in all, yeah, I think it's something to be a doctor, and I understand why it's so exclusive. Okay, listen to this. Shawna Novak is a global health practitioner and physician with academic appointments at Harvard Medical School and Harvard School of Public Health, University of Toronto, and McMaster University. She holds an MMSc in global health delivery from Harvard Medical School's Department of Global Health. Now, you're busy, like you're doing a lot of stuff, right?
Mhm.
So you're also the director of CISPO,
Mhm.
and CISPO was started many years ago by Dr. Arnie Noyak, whom we will speak of. But suffice it to say that CISPO does a lot of work around the world. You mentor an awful lot of young people, and you bring them on board in terms of global health. Um, and making this world a better place. So, were you passionate about medicine when you were a kid?
No, not at all. I thought that I was going to go into law.
Oh, what
And
changed?
I think that's actually something that I'm coming across more and more frequently with those of us who are in the global health sphere, and in peace building as well, because the work that I do is really right at that intersection of global health and peace building. And there's an element, and also social medicine, an element of advocacy, which is really integrated with the work that we do. And so you end up trying to find a way to advocate on so many different levels that it's almost as if we had taken that professional pathway and embedded it within the healthcare and the global health pathway. I was really heavily influenced by the idea of justice, and about being responsible not just for ourselves and our families, but for advocating on behalf of others, being able to, like you and like you've done with Hafta, really work towards ensuring that people have access to basic human rights. The the different elements that affect health and well-being are rooted in access to those rights, like the right to have clean water, the right to have access to enough food, to have shelter, but also beyond that, the structural forces that influence the access to gainful employment, which is integral. So I think that what ended up happening at some point very early on is I ended up realizing that I wanted to be able to be involved in those advocacy efforts on a practical basis. So
Mhm.
not just advocating for them on a performative basis, but taking action in the volunteer work that I was doing when I was about 16 years old, 15, 16, 17, 18, getting involved in really practical projects. And at the same time, I felt like when I looked at the healthcare sector, that was a way for me to do something that was very practical and pragmatic, and it involved being able to do Tikun Olam, to do Chesed, to stay involved with people, because at the end of the day, what I really love to do is I like to engage with people. I like to see how that evolution from of wellness can happen from the point of affecting things at the structural level to seeing how people are able to walk out of a door healthy and well and able to love their families and live healthy, happy lives. So
So
it
how might your relationship to the body, to the physical, be different than mine? What do you know that I don't know?
well, you have to tell me a little bit about your relationship with the body.
Oh, it's not too intimate. But I'm always curious about doctors. I was asking Dr. Brad Strauss. I asked him, where does God fit into when he's doing an operation to put, you know, pieces of metal in somebody's heart, which I've had, by the way. I've been a witness that I've had 4 stents put in. I'm always fascinated by that. You're able to see a person from the inside out and basically how they tick. I think that's probably more than I can do.
Actually, you mentioned something really interesting, that you think first. Yes, I understand what you're saying about feeling that it's more than what you can do to see how the human body works, from a biological perspective, from a
Right.
biochemical perspective, but also you're understanding things on an ethnographic level. And earlier on, when you were introducing me and you mentioned how you feel about doctors, what really struck me is that you're a natural ethnographer, and so you can see how the people that you come across on a day-to-day basis, whether you're walking out of an elevator or you go into a Persian restaurant and you meet the owners of the restaurant and you're having these conversations, and or whether it's with a 9-year-old on your radio show, everybody's bringing something in, whether it's a different understanding of life and lived experiences, or an element that contributes to the social fabric. And so it's not that going down a medical pathway in terms of profession is particularly special or exclusive. I would say it's actually the opposite. I think that everybody feels intuitively that there's something that they can contribute, and you end up gravitating towards exactly what that is at some point in your life. And you may find it early. Like I found it around 18 or 19 when I ended up crossing paths with Arnie, and that was life changing for me, and it kind of solidified everything that I was doing in different parts of my life, and it was just a very, very natural fit, and I could sit in that and build on it. But that's one lived experience. There, like you said, there's so many different lived experiences, and you're having these conversations, and if you don't open it up to the idea of everybody having a particular role and value, then I think it's to our disadvantage. So we want to be able to think of it as the larger social fabric, and there really is very little exclusiveness to making a choice, other than being able to have the privilege to make that choice.
So you were in your teens, and for whatever reason, your path met Dr. Arnie Noyak's path. Arnie passed away. He should rest in peace. He was a beautiful, brilliant, very capable human being, very resourceful, and he had a lot of gumption. He had a lot of courage and bravery. We'll talk about some of the stories that reflect that. First off, do you believe in your mind, based on your sort of spiritual understanding of life, were you meant to have met Dr. Arnie Noyak, or was that just happenstance?
I believe in serendipity.
You do.
I do, 100%. And it was also a blessing. I think that you're meant to meet certain people at certain points in your life, but then
Yes.
that's just a personal belief. It's nothing rooted in evidence-based
That's
practice
right.
of any sort
Exactly. That's
whatsoever.
right. Yes, you could be wrong, but tell us about Dr. Arnie Noyak. Why were you so intrigued by him?
Um, because when I started off, I was doing this type of interfaith work, and very much committed to the idea of Israeli-Palestinian peace building. Um, and at the same time, very committed to building some kind of a pathway that involved healthcare. I wasn't entirely sure what that would be. And I was working with Howard Edelman, another very impactful, incredible human being, who was at the time doing work in refugee repatriation, academic work, at York University. And I had connected with him to write a few yellow papers, looking at Ethiopian primary and secondary displacement, and then getting involved with some of his other work with the Israel Today Show and setting up programs for the Israel Today Show that had a lot to do with Tikun Olam.
Yes.
And I continued to do that when I had moved to Israel and was in Haifa and was in the hub of all these really, really compelling programs that few people had heard of outside of Israel, and needed to have been given a platform. And so I realized that the work in refugee repatriation was one thing. The work in refugee health and migration health was another thing as well, and all these different elements. But I was constantly talking to Howard, about this interest that I had, and about the work that I was trying to do, and how it dovetailed. And he said, well, you've really got to meet the neighbor that I have at my cottage up north. And I'm like, okay, sure. I like people. I really like people. So why not?
Yeah, I got that.
Yeah. And so he connected us, and I went to meet with him and Tim Patterson, who is on our board of directors, and we met down at the Dial Atlanta at University of Toronto campus. And I got put on a suit jacket, and I was like maybe 18, and I was nervous and excited because back then we didn't have Google, so I couldn't Google him and read everything and prepare myself. So I had to find out things the old school way. And when I went in to meet with him, the moment that I spoke with him and with Tim, it was like, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is who I'm supposed to be working with. This is everything. And so both of them opened the door, and the board at the time opened the door. I was working with Harvey Skinner, who was at the time was also on the board, and he was the dean at Dalalana of the School of Public Health. And really incredible people had been pulled together by Arnie on so many different levels, and they welcomed me. And I dived in and said, just whatever you've got, let me, I want to learn. And I think that was the key, is having that kind of growth mindset from the very beginning, and maintaining that, because there's still things that I'm learning every single day. And I'm learning from you, Avrum, with each conversation that we have.
Thank you, Shawna. Dr. Noyak, whom I knew, we shared a lot of information when I was running Via Hafta, and he was the director of SISPO. He was always very open, and he was very cheery and very boisterous. And the one thing that I remember particularly about him was that he really felt strongly, and he was very serious about it, that we could achieve peace in the Middle East through SISPO and other such programs. And I thought that was wonderful confidence. How often does somebody have such a belief in what they're doing that it can bring peace, be it world peace or regional peace? What is and what was SISPO that he felt so strongly about it? What do they do?
Yeah, first of all, he had a ton of chutzpah, and
He did.
and it was beautiful. And also, he's Irish, so that contributed to all of it too. He was able to make magic happen, and it wasn't just about his understanding of one intervention compromising the entire peace movement. It needed to be a collective. But at the same time, what he really believed in was that using the healthcare space was a way to drive forward the types of programs that could bring people together, generate social capital on something that's really needs specific. So if you bring people together and you look at the type of incentivization they have to come together, which can happen on many different levels, external incentivization, external incentivization, people want to participate in things for different reasons. And so there's a little bit of ethnography for you, being able to talk to people to find out what it is that they need in order to want to engage.
Yes.
And that was a really big part of the way that Arnie designed SISPO, is trying to really listen and understand why would somebody from Gaza want to get involved in programs like this? Why would somebody from Jordan want to get involved in programs like this? And at the time, it was based on that. It was Jordanians, Palestinians, Israelis, and Canadians. Now we've got 44 countries that are involved in this. Wow. And that allows us much greater latitude to what we're doing. But it started like that, and you have to really understand people. And you can only do that if you say, tell me more. I want to hear more, and genuinely want to. And so he was able to embed that and design these programs initially on hearing health. So infant hearing health, to address a need that was common to Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, and Canadians at the time, infant hearing health or infant deafness. And so based on that and his background in otolaryngology, ear, nose, throat,
yes. He was the director of Mount Sinai, was he not? The head of the department, yes.
Yes, he was, exactly. And so he took something that he knew really well, and that's generally how it works, is you take something that you know very, very well, and then you can build around that. And rather than like spreading your effort everywhere, you can focus on something and build. And another mentor that I worked with, Paul Farmer, did something similar with his work in tuberculosis, and was able to build on that effort. And so Arnie took that, and he realized that he would be able to build this connection through the Middle East Hearing Association, which he set up. And he walked himself over to the border of Jordan.
Yes.
with his little briefcase and a stethoscope. And he said, you know what? I've got this great idea. People should know about this great idea. And most especially the King of Jordan should know about this idea. And everybody's laughing at him. They're like, yeah, okay, this is,
Right.
not even
Right.
worth listening to. It's just another, over the top idea that comes out of left field. And he believed in it. And that was the core. That was the crux of it, is that because he believed in it, he committed to it, and he made it happen. He actualized it, and he actually walked his way into the office of the King of Jordan and sold him this idea of the program for infant deafness that would bring the region together. And it worked. And it turned into something that flourished. And also served as proof of concept, because in order to move forward with any other program, you've got to have proof of concept on what you're doing, and then you get buy-in. Because a lot of times, and Arnie understood this, is that people will always say no, this can't be done. Why? Because it hasn't been done before. Well, if it hasn't been done before, it doesn't mean that it can't be done. So let's plan it out and give it a shot, because most of the time, really, what do you have to lose? You need to look at their unintended consequences, but that doesn't mean a no. And there's all these ways that you can figure out how to sometimes make things work. But you got to believe in it, and you got to have a good plan, and you have to have people around you that are willing to go along with you. And he was a
How,
genius at that.
how much chutzpah do you have?
I'm born and bred in chutzpah. My
Good
DNA.
response. Good response. Would you walk into the King of Jordan's office?
I absolutely would.
You would. You would. So
Definitely.
you're fearless, more or less, right?
You know what? I learned at the feet of the people who were
Yeah.
phenomenal. Like Arnie, you couldn't ask to be blessed from learning from anybody other than somebody like Arnie, or like a Paul Farmer, or Joya Mukherjee, another person that I worked with, who was just a giant in the field. And
When
um,
you're in the zone, and this is something really good for everybody to listen to. If you're struggling to find your purpose and meaning in life, when you're in the zone, nothing can slow you down. And all the obstacles that you may feel otherwise in times of peril or challenging times, they're of no concern whatsoever. It's that you keep your head up. You go, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get it done, and nobody's going to stop me. When I was running Via Hofta, as you can imagine, there were many, many times, Shauna, where it was questionable as to whether we were going to make payroll or not. That's what running a nonprofit is all
got it.
about, as you know.
Yeah.
Um, but I said, you know what, this I'm going to do it, and it's on my shoulders, and I'm going to step up, and I'm going to make it happen. And thank God I did. And today the organization is just thriving,
You've done a
Um,
phenomenal job with that, Hefta.
yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. And now the executive director is Carrie Kozarek, who's just absolutely brilliant at what she does. And quite frankly, she does stuff I couldn't do. And I would say it's probably vice versa as well. In terms of how you described medicine and peace, let's say, or medicine and bringing people together, I want to ask you if this synopsis is correct or not. One of the things that you do is you sort of evaluate the WHO's Global Health and Peace Initiative in North Africa as well as in the Middle East. And I read the synopsis of the report, the studies, and essentially what they say is that we cannot achieve peace without health, and we cannot achieve health without peace. Is that an accurate assessment of what you just said about what Arnie was trying to succeed at?
It's a part of it. I think the feeling in general is that there are three components. The Lancet just released a commission about 6 months ago, written by Val Percival and Stephen Hoffman.
A medical journal, a major medical journal.
Yeah, major medical journal, and it was on health equity, gender equity, and the development of peaceful societies. And this is the type of work that we've been doing for decades, the work that I've been doing for 23 years, and that Arnie invested his entire life in. But there hasn't been enough contributions to the literature and support necessarily for it up until this point, because it takes time. until you can go beyond that proof of concept to adoption and scaling. And so it's multilateral in terms of the way that effect works. Yes, you have to have health, but health is a broad area. Health is also very political, and the way that we work as an organization is apolitical in a political field. And so we look at this as health equity is essential. Gender equity is essential. And there are certain things that you can do that are very pragmatic and measurable. And if you're working with organizations and institutions and governments, they're looking for things that are measurable. And that's why having a really robust way to do monitoring and evaluation, and then translate that into output, whether it's into the literature or also into practice, in making the shift from policy to practice, and on a broader level. And so there are a lot of trickle down pieces to that. So when you say, is it just about having one, can you have one without the other, they're so intrinsically tied together. But that actually makes it exciting, because then that means that there's so many pieces for us to be able to tackle that they're we're never going to have a dull moment. We're never going to have a moment when there's not something to do, whether it's addressing primary health care, whether it's working for universal health coverage, whether it's addressing infectious disease or epidemic like during the pandemic, which really shifted the dial in terms of what we were able to do, because only a year ago, 2 years, or I guess it's 4 years ago already, because we're going into 2024. But 2020 brought the creation of a binational COVID-19 task force for Israelis and Palestinians. That cracked open the egg. We could do incredible things during that time of the pandemic, even though it was such an awful, difficult, challenging time. Out of chaos came an opportunity.
What could you do? Like what?
So we used the vehicle of the binational COVID-19 task force to be able to deliver programs with mobilizers. So working at the grassroots level, using the task sharing model to train up people on the ground on a collective basis, using a model that was piloted by Karen Avrum at Tel Aviv University. She's the dean of Tel Aviv University, and a very involved longtime member of SISAPO, to translate the ability to do epidemic prevention and control. So screening, follow-up, being able to do home visits so that you could identify in the home whether there was a need for care, pieces of care like women's menstrual products that couldn't really get distributed in the West Bank or in Gaza for that matter, or even in Israel proper, without the use of these community-driven models. And so we created a triangular cooperation project, Israelis, Palestinians, Canadians, using the Canadian umbrella. And we really invested heavily into that mobilizer model that we were then able to build on, embedding psychological first aid into that for what was happening during the pandemic. And the best way to understand what's happening in people's homes, especially when they're disconnected from each other because of something like the pandemic, is to actually have some kind of presence and communication from those who are already in those communities, and to build on the trust that's there, because there are a lot of trusted community members who are leaders and they're influential in their own way, and you've got to give them the ability. You have to give them the tools, and so much is done that way. And then from that, we had this cooperation. It was an incredible way to shift the dial, and so because of that, I think that there's always going to be possibilities like that come up, even though the reality is that the situation right now is fluid, and there's always ups and downs when it comes to socio-political realities all across the Middle East. But healthcare and music, for that part, tend to be the areas where people are most comfortable with working towards commonalities, common goals that affect the greater good, and also it affects them individually and their families. So those are two spaces.
Shawna, When I first started up the van program at Via Havta, which we call the Mobile Jewish Response to the Homeless, essentially we take volunteers out into the streets most 6 nights a week now, I believe. And I was very intent upon making sure that we were very high profile Jewish. And I did that because I wanted people to see, for very practical reasons, utilitarian reasons, that the Jewish people were out there doing Tikun Olam. For me, that was a way of countering anti Semitism and building friends. October 7th comes about, and we see that anti Semitism is rife. And I have to remind myself that the Jewish people have many, many friends in the world. But, obviously I can't escape the reality that anti Semitism is alive and well. And I'm going to guess you can't escape that either. So both you and I have done a lot of work in terms of helping others and at the same time introducing them to the Jewish people. Is there any disappointment that you've experienced since October 7th after all the work that you've done because of the response to so much of the world to the Jewish people and to the state of Israel?
I will never lose faith in humanity. I was heartbroken on October the 7th. I don't think anybody could not be. Shattered into a million pieces, but you pull yourself together, and you look around for those who you can build solidarity with. And so I hesitate to say that, there's always, I mean, I'm deeply disappointed, and I have many other words to describe, how I felt. Probably some of which are not palatable in the context of a
You can say anything you want on my podcast. I don't care.
But realistically, I've actually been feeling lately a sense of support that's come from people that I had placed my faith in. I spent a lot of time on the campus in Boston, and it's the medical school and School of Public Health campus and the general campus in Boston are rife with polarization and anti-Semitism, and it's been very, very difficult times, but I don't think that's something that is unexpected, because this wave comes along regularly throughout human history. And so I think some of this is about understanding that the wave is there. It will always rise and fall. And so knowing that, how do we function within that? How do we function now within that? And so I've been leaning really heavily into what I'm able to do individually to build solidarity and foster those interfaith relationships. And also within SISPO and the other hats that I wear. You would be surprised how many people are just afraid to say anything, because maybe you wouldn't be surprised, actually. It's not surprising anymore. It's an environment where people feel that they can't speak their minds. We've lost or forgotten the ability how to talk to each other. And this is something that we need to work on collectively, and not necessarily get lost in. Because I think that getting lost in it and focusing on the despondency of it all and the fear hinders our ability to move forward. And that also harkens back to the way Arnie was in his favorite saying was always moving forward. He would sign every email that he wrote, always moving forward. and that's an effective approach to dealing with the situation right now.
Are you at all frightened to be an identifiable Jew?
That's a great question, Avram. It's the first time in my entire life where I felt fear for myself and for my family.
Yes.
And for my friends and my colleagues. And that's that's a strange emotional place to be at, because I come from a Holocaust survivor family.
Yes.
So I grew up on stories of how my grandfather survived, and how his experience of going through the Holocaust and living underground for 3 years, living in the soil, hiding himself every night, and surviving on potatoes, and the heroics. But I never made the connection that this was really something, or a fear that I should have, and I had to sit in that for a little bit, and come to terms with the reality that there always will be people who don't necessarily hear us or understand us as a people, or know what a Jewish person is, or know what Judaism is, and there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation, and especially since there's so much reliance on social media, and what it's done is we end up falling into these echo chambers where people are yelling into echo chambers, amplifying the effects of what happens on either end, whether it's within the Jewish community amplifying its own frustration and fear, or in other faith-based communities, or at large.
Yes.
And so what ends up happening is it makes it a situation that's rife for demoralization. So people feeling less confident that the structures that are around them will protect them, and that are reliable. And also a little bit of ideological subversion. But the corollary to that is that when you have times of demoralization, and people look around to see what can they hold on to find grounding, and there are a couple ways to do that. One is through faith, and another is through finding, being close with those who you love, and finding the allies that you have. And there are many that we don't see by staying stuck in our echo chambers. And then secondary to that, when you have a kind of like ideological subversion that's been happening for so many years through social media and on many different levels, it also means that there's room for shifting towards social good. Whenever you have one, you have the other. Dark and light, and all the different shades in between. There's space for movement and flexibility and fluidity. And so I think that means that if we're able to really lean into that, we can find a way to shift the way that we feel the day after. But we're not going to know when that day after is, and that's the key, because I think we'll be beyond the day after before we realize it's the day after. And so
You
we got to
know,
do that now.
Charles Schultz, the writer of Peanuts, Charlie Brown, he did one comic strip which stated Charlie Brown was speaking to Lucy, and he said, I believe that half of me contains good stuff and half of me contains not so good stuff, right? And when I'm feeling not so good, what I do is I tilt a little bit this way, right? So that the good stuff pours into the not so good stuff, and that the two come together and I feel like a better person. Now, Charles Schultz's lines were much better than mine, obviously. But the point is what you're making, is what you're saying. I too believe in humankind. I am deeply, deeply heartbroken by October 7th, deeply heartbroken, and so much of the response of the world. But I am confident that we have many, many friends. Evil by definition is very vocal, and goodness by definition is quite humble. So we don't hear as much about it, but I know that it's there. And I know that because I've worked with a lot of goodness, a lot of fine, fine people. Shawna, on October 7th, you were in Spain. It had been 10 years since you had taken a holiday. And you are a cyclist, which I think is fascinating. And you used to participate in the triathlon as well, on a national level, actually. Anyways, it's October 7th, the morning of, you're about 2, 3 days into your holiday. Must have been great. And your phone just starts ringing off the hook, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you were hearing from your colleagues in Israel, in Gaza, in the region about what had happened and what was happening. Um, what was your response to it?
Disbelief at first. And then I fell into the national muscle memory of, okay, time to respond. and so that really meant reaching out to everybody. Because the first thing you need to do in any situation like that, not that we've ever experienced a situation like that, but times of disaster, reach out and listen to what's happening on every level so that the communication is really clear and fulsome. And so that's what I did nonstop. Those moments before were phenomenal. It was great. I was, in the mountains, and there was sunshine, and I was with, good friends who are also cyclists, and we were just having the best time.
I'm so sorry for you, God.
Well, there'll be many more riding opportunities.
Yeah, God willing, yes.
But if anything, it was kind of a good way to be able to try to deal with some of the things going on in my mind during the day, because I would, push the rides until a different time so that I could deal with what I needed to deal with within SISABO, because SISABO is a really effective body working during times like this because of the relationships that we have, relationships with, WHO, relationships on many different levels, especially within the communities that are affected right now. So forget about WHO and United Nations and the governments. This is, people. And so I had a lot to be able to think about. And so I'd be on my bike and on, middle of nowhere, Mallorca or Girona, and trying to sort through this with, sweat pouring down. And that's kind of the best way sometimes. The endorphins balanced off the some of the emotions, and allowed me to think a little bit clearer.
What did you do? What was your response?
Well, like I said, we had to listen first, and then kind of utilize the concept of meta leadership, which is something where you're thinking, okay, where are we? What resources do we have? We have to lead across, above, and down. And so what that means in practical terms is there are people that will follow our example, and there are people that we need to work with on a lateral basis, and there are people who we can appeal upwards to. And so we were doing all of that. So if you think just going in every direction, but there was a lot that was happening in Israel at the time because of the protests that have been going on for the past 45 some odd weeks. There was already a framework that was in place was easily transitioned over to provide immediate needs for people who were suffering. And less so on the Palestinian side. But there's a really great organization, collective actually, of people and organizations working within the peace building sector in that region that immediately connected with each other. So that was part of our role. And we needed to be able to find a way to shore up what was needed. So the weaknesses were really providing immediate support related to linkages, providing reinforcement for what was needed from the alumni of SISPO programs, including our IPME program, where we have medical students and graduates. So they're now young professionals working in hospitals on both sides of the divide, and provide that support for them, because the support was so integral, especially when on the Israel side, we had alum from the programs who were being called up immediately to go and serve in the reserves, even though that was the last thing that they wanted to do, other than the fact that they knew that this is, for them, was an existential matter. But they went, and then had they needed to be able to find a way to talk to their colleagues in IPME, this program, this really special, beautiful program that for them was so transformative, but then here they are again fighting against each other. It was destabilizing for them. Extremely destabilizing.
Do you have any stories of that day or subsequent days?
Many stories. Where do you want me to start?
Just share one with us of a very personal nature, a colleague of yours, someone you knew, or
Yeah,
no?
I mean, one of the first conversations that I had on that day was with one of the students that I had been mentoring for past 10 years. He was a graduate of one of our IPME programs, and he's been very, very involved in everything that we do, because we constantly have programs that are there, whether they're mental health programs, or whether they're maternal health programs, or whether they're rehabilitation programs, geriatric programs. And so he was one of the first people that I reached out to. And he said to me, listen, my two brothers have been called up to go and fight. And I can barely function. And I said, well, where are you? And he said, well, right now I'm in emergency, like I'm working. I'm in Tel Aviv, and I don't even know how I can continue to make it through the rest of today. And so we talked about this, and he said, they're going to call me too. And he said, I don't know how to respond. And I said, well, you will know how to respond if you get that call. And then he said to me, if I go, there's really nobody who's going to be able to take my place here, because everybody's being called away. So it means that, the healthcare system is immediately going to be overloaded. And it was already starting to be overloaded, because there are already people flowing in, displaced people who are, really severely injured. And so he was already seeing this, and it was only going to get more acute. And so he said, I would really like to be able to call my friends in this program, and I don't know if they want to hear from me. And I said to him, you know what? You've been doing this for 10 some odd years. Like, he's been involved for 10 some odd years. I fully have faith in you. I fully trust your ability to know what the right thing is to do in this situation, and you need to go with your heart. And I said, whichever way, I'm here for you, and Saisabo is here for you. But know that this group that we pulled together didn't come out of nowhere. Everybody who's in this group is very special. Special because they chose to go through the programs that they participated in. They chose to stay involved. They went through this transformative process, which was extremely difficult to do. Extremely difficult. I can tell you times when during programs like this, at the beginning, people who participate are afraid to sit next to each other.
So we're talking about Arabs and Jews here.
We are talking specifically about like an Israeli Jewish physician being concerned about whether and how he should continue to reach out to his Palestinian friends and colleagues that are in the West Bank and Gaza, that are part of these SISIPO programs, because of what's happening.
Yes.
And even with all the training, not being entirely certain how the realities are now changed in terms of how he has to shift how he engages and how he dialogues. And what ended up coming out of it is he ended up making those phone calls, and he ended up reaching out to another one of our graduates who he felt kinship with.
What was the
And
result of the call? Do you know?
the result of the call were those phone calls and the development of kind of an upsurge of support within that program, so that when I called him the next time to see how he was doing, he said, it was the best decision that I ever made. I'm still having tremendous difficulty with what's happening, and right now he actually is serving in the reserves, and it's every single day is tenuous, but being able to have those conversations, and tap into the kinship that was there, was the cycle, like the balm for his soul that he needed, during a time like this. And not only just that, because it needs to be reciprocal. And so when I spoke to the other student, that had the Palestinian student that is also part of our program, and had contributed just as much and was just as much involved, as this Israeli physician, the feeling was the same, is that, there is an immediate sense of, does this mean that we're alone? Does this mean that we're now in a vacuum, that there's nobody else, that it's just us? And that's the worst thing to feel, is that you're completely isolated, when,
Yes.
as human beings, we need that connectivity. We need to know that we have people around us. We're not meant to be, isolated. And so, that there's so much isolation going on right now on so many different levels, that being able to do small things like this, because we can't tackle it all, is really part of how we're going to be able to heal at some point, and embed that sense of safety back into how we live and how we function, and how society is going to have to, evolve moving forward.
Shawna, where do the dots attach in terms of your medical work, your pursuit of peace through health, playing many instruments, and being a cyclist? How do they all fit together?
Well, there's one thing that comes to mind first, that I think is really interesting. So, yes, they all come together. They all intersect in my life.
I know they do.
And they make me who I am, but they also make everybody has all these different, pieces of the mosaic that make them who they are.
Yes.
And something that's really interesting happens, within Israel, and within our communities within Sisebo, and within the communities, that of Sisebo programs for Palestinians, and also less so in the rest of the world, because this is what we're living 24/7 right now, is that social cohesion. And Arab Israelis within Sisebo programs have never felt this aligned, in Israel, because of, especially, and despite what's happened over the past couple of years, that's been difficult, and destabilizing, with the judicial changes, and changes, political level. So that's really changed things. And so the reason I bring that up is because it made me think of it, because when I was younger and I was racing, on the national team, and triathlon was a much bigger part of my life. One of the things that drew me to it was, the ability to go and race in countries, some of which had never met a Jewish person, and at the time I was living in Israel, so they'd never seen anybody from Israel, and they didn't know anything about it. And I was going into Arab countries and racing, and it was like an incredible opportunity to do some rattling of the status quo, and so what ended up happening is I would have these conversations and build these friendships with other athletes. And actually, one of these athletes is coming to Toronto next week. She is, from Mombasa, from Kenya, which is, at the time was, I think, like 93% Muslim. And I had gone to stay with her family as a homestay, with two other athletes that I was traveling with, two athletes from Israel, and they opened her home to us, and this friendship flourished, and it was incredible, because they had never seen or met somebody Jewish or somebody Israeli, and here we were doing a sport that we loved, that was full of good spirit. And then you have like the endorphins, because you're that's what happens when you're doing a sport, and when it's around people also, and there's so many good vibes involved in it, so that you can connect in a different way. And so that's actually probably why I stayed in the sport for as long as I did, is because I felt that sport also was a fantastic conduit for doing this type of peace building work, without it being so on the face. So it was sort of like, taking this idea that even back then, it hadn't really been thought of as like a typical methodology or approach. Yeah, I'm going to go and use sport to bring people together. But it was naturally, because, the Olympic Games are there for a reason. But when you do it on a one-to-one basis as an athlete, everything opens up to you in terms of like the human spirit, and the best parts of humanity. If you're really able to connect with somebody who has that willingness, and there is a lot of that there. So it crossed paths with the work that I was doing in medicine, the work that I'm doing in global health, and the work that I'm doing overall. Because whether you look at it with medicine, whether you look at it with music, whether you look at it in terms of sports, they're all areas where people feel comfortable being in the same
Yeah.
place, doing the same thing, leaning into those commonalities, and realizing that at the end of the day, we're just people, all of us. There is no like different type of equivalency, and so it's about really, taking off our masks, and showing, who it is that we are, and allowing that to be the light to guide and find somebody else's light.
Which instruments do you play?
Piano is my number one. Um, I was obsessed with it, and clarinet and guitar, and I love to sing like Arnie.
Can you sing something for us?
No.
Shawna, do your parents worry about you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think everybody's parents worry about them. It's, but at the same time, you face risks when you walk out your door, and you walk into traffic, or you walk on a sidewalk, and you never know. You never know what life is going to bring you. So the idea is to mitigate your risk as much as possible, and stick with your heart, root yourself in your faith, find those who are on the similar path to you, find your people, and move forward on that basis. And I protect my parents and my family a lot. My parents and my family is number one for me, and it was the same with Arnie. Family first. So I think that it's a good thing when there are people out there who worry about you.
One of the things that we talked about in our pre-interview was your passion for and your commitment to the Jewish faith, and it, it was actually very exciting for me to hear how you embrace Judaism and always have, from a values standpoint, from a ritualistic standpoint. How does faith play a role in your day to day?
It was something that I never had to think of until I left Israel.
Yeah, you were saying.
Because yeah, and by leaving Israel, I just mean not being 100% based there anymore, because I'm based in Boston, and in Toronto, and in Israel, and in Africa, all over the place.
You're
Um,
international.
yeah, I think a lot of us are these days. We're global citizens, and thanks to the world making it easier to do that, or to be that way. But I I find that the values and the frameworks in terms of ethics are a great way to give myself a sense of stability, in knowing that the way that I conduct my life is a way that I'm going to feel proud of, and so you know that that piece is not negotiable for me. I really love rituals, the Jewish rituals. So doing Shabbat is really important to me. I'm not religious, but at the same time, it's very much a part of my life because there are experiences that I have through my Judaism, which root me. Observing Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are important to me and allow me that opportunity to reflect on how I'm doing things and how I and ask for forgiveness for the things that I may be doing wrong, because there's always room for doing things differently and better. And at the beginning we talked about, you introduced me by saying successes, here and there, but really it's you make mistakes all the time. And so by coming back to Judaism, I'm able to reflect on those mistakes, and I'm able to say, okay, well, what do I need to do, and what does this really mean, looking at it through this lens. Another element which is really important to me is us as the Jewish people have traditionally been very focused on Tikun Olam. And so it makes me feel good to know that as a people, this is really what we're dedicated to.
Repairing the world.
We're dedicated to that. We're dedicated towards social equality. We're dedicated towards principles of fairness. We're dedicated towards these social ideals, which I really hold dear, and it gives me a lot of hope constantly, and that's something that I'm very proud of.
Yes, me too. Me too.
Yeah, yeah.
I mentioned to you that I started learning Torah very intensely about 4 years ago, and I also began teaching some classes. And as I read it, I started to understand Judaism and the Torah more so than I ever had before. And I was deeply intrigued, and I became a very, very, very proud Jew because of my Torah learning. And one of the reasons is, just to throw out an example, the concept of Jubilee.
Mm-hmm.
So
tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's in simple terms, after 49 years, you have to return a plot of land that you bought from somebody. You have to give it back. And the idea behind it is, listen, you've made enough money, must speak, like they say in Hebrew. Ginnik in Yiddish. It's enough. You don't need more money. And it's sort of going on the premise that the person you're returning it to, maybe they've fallen on, economic hard times. Well, what a fascinating idea that is. My gosh. Right? Like, I only need to make so much money. I don't need to be a multi-gazillionaire as so many people want to be. And it's the idea of fairness and sharing, love of the neighbor, and so many other important values in life. So I think we're on the same page as far as that goes. I want to conclude by asking you a pretty simple question. I think a lot of people, as I mentioned at the top of the show, are looking for purpose and meaning in life. I'm going to guess that you never wake up in the morning and say, what I'm going to do, what am I going to do with my life, right? Would that would be accurate, would it not be?
It's fair to say.
Yeah, fair to say.
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell individuals who are watching our show about a trick, perhaps, a tip on how to pursue one's gift, their internal gift, how to find that purpose and meaning in life, which may have evaded them up until this point?
I think the key to that is that you have to do. You need to get out. I mean, and not physically get out. You could do it on on your computer. You could do it in your home, but you need to do. You need to expose yourself to as many different things, as many different people, as many different activities as possible, until serendipity hits you. And then there's gonna be something, and you may not realize what that something is, but it'll sit on you.
Yes.
And it'll settle in, and then all of a sudden you'll find yourself realizing that doing that thing, whatever that thing is is not a chore, and you can spend all your time doing it. You can
Yes.
sacrifice sleep, you can sacrifice, whatever it is, because you just want to do it all the time because it's like your driving force.
Yes.
And so the way to find that is to talk, have the conversations, because you know everybody's got something to say, even though they may not be sharing it with you right away. You want to be able to open up, to what can be discussed, and what other people's experiences, until like something, that little like earworm sits there, and then you're like, oh, tell me more, please. And then before you know it, all of a sudden you're going to realize that you've got to do that. I think sometimes we tend to get stuck in the obstacles of doing that, whatever that is. And I can't follow this professional pathway because there's this barrier, it's a financial barrier, or I have 5 kids, or I have this. But there's always something that you can do that will be compelling to you. But if you're on your own, if you're screaming into a dark abyss of social media, you're not going to find it.
Shawna, you know one of the things I really love about you? You laugh all the time.
Yeah.
Is that from a great sense of joy?
Yeah, I come from a family that laughs a lot, and that
You
loves
guys laugh a
humor
lot?
a lot. We like our family get-togethers are just fun, a lot of
Like,
fun.
do you laugh your head off?
Yeah, oftentimes. And also, like, I'm attracted to friends that will laugh with me.
Yes.
I when I did my master's degree in Boston, I was in a program that was very small. So we had, I guess, maybe like 16 people in our program, in our cohort, and from all over the world, and everybody doing incredible work that was very, very focused, but difficult. Like, we survivors of genocides, of a genocide in particular, but when we came together, and we were together every single day, we became so close. Why? Because we were laughing all the time. It was just like the best experience for it was a 2-year master's, and very practical master's, but we were together, and like every single day until our field work, and we just used that as balm for the soul.
Yes.
And you keep going back to connecting with people who can live like that with you. And now that I graduated, that program's over there, my good dear friends and professional colleagues, and still we're get together, and it's just tons of fun.
Yeah, I find I've worked with people from all over the world as well. Rwanda, Haiti. And what's interesting, Guyana was one of the most impoverished countries in the Western Hemisphere, that these people would laugh a lot. Surprisingly so, but they would. Whereas we who live in the West, who have it better than any time in history, often we're somewhat morose in nature.
Yeah, I'll tell you 2 things. Um, I think that's a little bit true. There's still a lot of,
It's a
people who,
brushstroke statement, granted.
yeah.
Trying to make
Uh,
my point. Yes.
but I was talking to a professor of mine, who's now a good friend, and she had said to me, I've never seen one group of people spend so much time enjoying their time together,
Yeah.
and but yet it's difficult work. And I said, well, yeah, that's the idea. It serves as like a bulwark against all the dark nights, and there are many dark nights and difficult times, and it's just, that's the way life is, and you hope that there are fewer of those dark times and more of the sunshiny days. But the reality is it's a mixed bag. So you find that, and it does serve as a bulwark. And she said, I think it's actually the same for me. And I said, really? And she said, Yeah, she's somebody who spends a lot of time working in Haiti and in Rwanda, and she said, I don't think that I could have done this work for. I think she's been doing it now for 30, 40 years, and she says I couldn't have lasted if the people that I was working with couldn't laugh about what we were
Yeah,
going through.
right, exactly.
Um,
I think that's one of the strengths of the Jewish people too, that we can laugh our head off. I was
yeah,
talking to my friend Ellie Rubenstein last week, who's the spiritual leader at Habonim and the director of international education for March of the Living, and he's quite the scholar when it comes to the Holocaust. And he told me, he says, there's humor, there's jokes that came out of the Holocaust, and there are jokes that are coming out of October 7th right now, right?
yeah, hmm
And
because
that's a powerful thought, powerful
yeah,
idea
yeah. I mean, we've got a long tradition of humor
of laughing.
in our culture.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you saw, there was this really funny one that was going around. That was, I think it's like Eretz Nehederet, one of the comedy shows in Israel, and it was about how those who are in Hamas are in Qatar, and the way things work in terms of people rallying and thinking that they're going to be affecting change, and sometimes they do, but more often than not, it ends up going to support the wrong thing that they don't
Yeah.
realize that they're supporting. Anyways, it's like it's a dark thing, but they turned it around, so it was hilarious. I have to send you this.
Yeah, I guess you'd have
um,
to be there.
yeah, I'll send it to you.
Shawna Novak, I'm just delighted to have talked to you for the last hour and a bit. And the thing that I took out of our interview is I was personally, I was very inspired by what you've done in your life and then what you continue to do and how you bring all these various different dots together to build your character, to build your personality. But even, more so, or at least equivalent to that is the development of others and the strengthening of Israel, the Jewish people, and the world in which we live in. And I think that's a very, very powerful message that you've sent out. I think a lot of people are going to benefit from it, in particular right now, because it is a very, very challenging time. But what we're seeing, the sadness coming out of Israel, is in my mind very equal to the happiness and the joy, and I see that in you. So I want to thank you very much, really, for being here and for what you've done with your life to date. And God willing, you should just continue to be very successful, prosperous, busy, and sharing your message with so many others. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Avram, for being you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate you saying
And
that.
for this conversation. Got to have more
Yeah.
of these conversations, because I think that showing people that there doesn't need to be a deafness. Arnie
Right.
worked on infant hearing deafness, but there's a kind of deafness happening right now, and it's a deafness that doesn't doesn't need to be there. We need to be able to hear each other out, and be able to know that there are things that can be done, practical things. And people that help us laugh and find light through
Agreed.
difficult times.
Folks, I want to thank you also for listening and for watching. If you have any great ideas for guests, please let me know. You can be in touch with me at avram.rosensweig@gmail.com. What are the criteria? I like ordinary folk who are extraordinary. I'll leave that up to you to define, but I think they're ubiquitous. I think they're out there. I don't think they're difficult to find. And I also really want to stress the idea that if you're in a place where you're having a hard time finding your purpose and meaning, firstly, listen to what Sean had to say. I think it's very valuable. Is the idea of doing something. I happen to agree with that. There have been times in my life where I've been stuck. And the way I got out of it was diving into something. It wasn't always in sync with my soul, but that didn't matter. I wasn't sitting there, watching a wall. And that is very crucial. Speak to a lot of people. There are so many inspiring people out there. Really, once you get out there, once you start meeting people. And you're right, Shauna, not exclusively on internet, although you can meet wonderful people there as well. The fact of the matter is you're going to grow by sharing your ideas and thoughts with others and listening very closely as to what they have to say, which was something that we take out of this interview as well. Life is a blessing, and it's a blessing to be born and to live. We in Canada, in the West, and certainly there are gifts in all parts of the world. So take those out of it, maximize what you have, and just make your life rock. Do your very best. I appreciate you listening. This is the Avrum Rosensweig Show. Am Yisrael Chai. The nation of Israel lives, and God willing, there should be peace as early as today. If not today, then tomorrow. God bless.
L'chaim to that.
L'chaim. Yeah, l'chaim. Good one.